The United States is committed to a phenomenal trade deal between the U.S. and the U.K. There is tremendous potential in that trade deal.
Britain, in theory, is set to leave the European Union on the 31st of October. If the UK comes crashing out without a deal, it seems, and if comments during his recent state visit are anything to go by, that Donald Trump will be there with eagerly open arms to strike a deal with its transatlantic partner. But what would a trade deal with the USA really mean for Britain? President Trump is said to be planning to offer Britain a trade deal which would blow all others out of the water. But if the UK reaches a deal with America, it would mean adopting a whole new set of agreements that would concern things like agriculture and food imports and standards.
I think we'll have a very, very substantial trade deal. It'll be a very fair deal, and I think that this is something that your folks want to do, my folks want to do, and we want to do, and we're going to get it done.
At the moment, the UK is still in the EU, so it's automatically part of about 40 trade agreements which the EU has with more than 70 countries, such as Norway, Switzerland, South Africa and South Korea. This covers free movements of things like product standards and labelling, rights of movement and residence of EU citizens, company law and banking regulation.
Most economists say that we would lose more from the extra barriers that a US deal would cause in terms of trade with the EU than we would gain in terms of trade with the US. In fact, the numbers are not that great for a US trade deal. Donald Trump talked about trade going up by 2 or 3 times. Economists say it's more like 2 or 3%.
British consumers and companies can also import from elsewhere in the EU without tariffs. But in the case of a hard Brexit, the UK would need to strike new deals in order to have free trade with those countries or with remaining EU members. And so far, the government has managed to secure 10 of the 40 countries' deals. Trade between the UK and the US is already worth $190 billion, and it's grown by more than 70% in the last decade. Yes! According to a report by the Department of International Trade, the UK deals approximately $70 billion in imports and $114 billion in exports to and from the US each year, which is why the relationship between the two countries is so crucial. Currently, the UK and the US have set up trading arrangements known as mutual recognition agreements. The biggest one being based around the pharmaceutical sector, which amounts to around 7.7 billion of UK exports to the US, so that's about 18% of the overall total.
The benefits aren't only one way in terms of our exporters benefiting from access to the US market. What we would also be expecting to happen is that our consumers in this country will benefit from cheaper goods, more choice, and actually ultimately better quality of goods, because the competition should drive up standards and drive down prices.
Some Brexiteers believe that a deal with the US is one of the greatest prizes that could come from the UK leaving the European Union, and in turn will bring us closer to trading with the wider world. But there are also areas that are causing some concern, and one of the biggest ones is chicken.
I think we should always be sceptical about trade deals, and we should always make sure that we know exactly what's in there, and we should not be rushed to do them. And you should be particularly sceptical if somebody says they're going to do it next week, or Nigel Farage says he's going to go over and negotiate tomorrow. You should be really concerned, because then we'll get things wrong and then we might suffer.
If the US trade deal did get the green light, your local chicken shop could be serving you chlorinated chicken straight from America. As stomach-turning as it sounds, in the UK we already eat salad that's been washed in chlorine, and the EU scientists say that's not the issue. They argue that relying on chlorination at the end of the food production leads to lower standards of farming earlier in the processing chain, despite some supporters believing that the practice kills the bacteria. The subject was featured in a recent investigation by Channel 4's Dispatches, showing the dirty conditions inside Tyson Foods, a major US factory, which some experts argued could lead to salmonella and other bacteria being transferred onto the meat.
These things will get used politically by people first of all, who never wanted to leave the EU in the first place, and people who are really quite anti-American generally, and certainly anti-Trump, have these people who are very resistant to the idea. Have they ever been to America, and did they eat the chicken?
Chlorinated chicken has been banned from the EU for 22 years, and instead the EU rules make sure that flock densities and transport times are set to a limit, which would prevent the harmful spread of bugs that make you really, really sick. Another concern raised has been for the NHS, the UK's publicly funded medical care that anyone living in the UK can access for free. In a recent press conference, Donald Trump said that the NHS would be on the table when it comes to a trade deal between the UK and America. This would enable American private firms to be able to bid for NHS contracts, which would lead to further privatisation of the health service.
When you're dealing in trade, everything's on the table. So NHS or anything else, or a lot more than that, but everything will be on the table, absolutely.
His comment echoed the remarks made by Washington's ambassador to London, Woody Johnson. But then, in a later interview of Piers Morgan on Good Morning Britain, Trump made a remarkable U-turn.
I don't see it being on the table. Somebody asked me a question today, and I say everything's up for negotiation, because everything is, but I don't see that being, that's something that I would not consider part of trade. That's not trade.
So as the UK heads towards its departure date with the EU, as far as a trade deal with America is concerned, there are still so many unknowns.
On behalf of all Americans, I offer a toast to the eternal friendship of our people, the vitality of our nations, and to the long-cherished and truly remarkable reign of Her Majesty, the Queen.
US President Donald Trump made all the right noises during his state visit and seemed set on strengthening the post-Brexit relations between the two nations.